Okay, I think we've got a nice critical mass, so we'll get started with the program. I want to welcome everyone. I hope you have your winter beverage of choice and maybe even your mittens handy. I'm Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at the Wharton Esherick Museum. I'm going to be co-hosting the program today with my colleague Katie Wynn, who's the Communications and Special Programs Manager at the museum. And we're really excited to have you join us today for the first offering in our virtual Spotlight Talk series. What these are sort of a 15-minute look at a narrow topic we don't usually cover in depth in a tour at the museum, with some time for some questions at the end and just saying hi and connecting. We thought the season called for a sort of quick introduction here to how Esherick began making block prints through some early snowy scenes. And I'll give you a look into that. And then Katie will share some thoughts on winter woodcuts that depict Esherick's life and surroundings. So I just want to begin with a little bit of a quick housekeeping. We're going to have our emails up at the end of the talk. Tell us if you like this Spotlight program idea at the end. We'd love to hear feedback from you. I hope that we'll see some of you at a future program on January 7th. That'll be our first virtual program in the new year for a Creatives on Esherick talk with Peter Park, January 7th, 3 p.m. You can register for that on our website. Also on our website, and we'll have a link to this at the end, we have coloring pages for this conversation if the little ones in your life or you would like to do some coloring of these winter scenes. And a blog post about some of these topics that are up on the website. And those will be not just in links at the end, but also in the chat and follow-up email. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. And okay, so our winter woodcut spotlight talk beginning here with Man in the Snow from 1923. And I think many of us felt like that in the blizzard we had just recently. So I want to start here. Esherick was making woodcuts with winter as a context, starting really early in his career as a printmaker. Certainly printmaking is one of the first places he saw success as an artist, and he produced roughly 350 prints total, mostly between 1922 and 1934. His first attempt at making them came about through meeting the author Mary Marcy in the artist colony of Fairhope, Alabama, where Esherick and his family spent time in 1919, 1920. Marcy was working on a book of children's poetry about evolution. Esherick had recently started carving, hand carving frames for his paintings. He carved and printed a woodcut block inspired by Marcy's poetry, and she in turn would write a new verse and they'd go back and forth, creating poetry inspired by images, images inspired by poetry, and the two formed this ongoing collaboration resulting in the publication of Rhymes of Early Jungle Folk, which includes over 70 Esherick woodcuts. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with that publication. This image is an image taken from that book. It's titled Change, 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 and accompanies a poem that details the story of the age Cenozoic. So that's the age of mammals and new life on Earth in the story of evolution, which required, and we'll quote here from Marcy's poem, required the stoic in order to grow and survive a living contraption with gifts of adaptation, and the mammals began to arrive. And so you've got these woolly mammoths here. They certainly seem ready for the snowy winter. One of the things that I think this print in particular shows is how snowy scenes and how working with snowy scenes allow Esherick to play with some of the really inherent interesting qualities of woodblock printmaking, especially its capacity to create high contrast images. As we look at these snowy scenes, the way that Esherick uses these big swaths of white space with the snow to sort of demarcate space and also to create this sense of mood and weather. That comes throughout I think all of the images that we're going to be looking at. Let's go to the next page. So this series of woodcuts, made only a year later, gives this real sense of how quickly Esherick developed a facility with making and printing woodblocks. These are 3 winter scenes published in The Century, which was a monthly magazine featuring journalism, literature, poetry, and art. It's really wonderful to be able to compare and contrast them, because it's a great reminder that not every depiction of winter and snow has to look the same. Esherick gives this sense of the changing feelings and weather that comes from month to month. So we've got December on the left, which is this very sort of like homey scene depicting Sunnycrest here. We think about the sort of home for the holidays, the December snows that feel really beautiful and inviting. We lead to January, where it's this really fantastic agricultural kind of rural scene. We've got this wonderful sort of landscape of flat snow, and then the prints in it. It gives us that sort of nod to the idea of a fresh start, right? We've got those first tracks in the snow after a snowfall, but we're coming out from the domestic. And then I'm looking at February here, this kind of, the way he's used individual sort of gouging marks to create the idea of these heavy snow-covered branches. We're looking at an image that gives us a sense of being sort of lost in a forest after a blizzard. We don't have a lot of space or respite to go, and maybe that's how winter might feel in February, when we're starting to get a little tired of it. So really different vantage points on the landscape there, this close-up on home versus zooming out. And I think, speaking of the way that Esherick depicted his home in winter landscapes, I'm going to toss things over to Katie for a couple of slides.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Emily. I am excited to share. So one of the things I get to do as part of the team at WEM is dig through the archives a little bit and see some of the wonderful photos and various ephemera from the museum. And can you all see me, or are you still looking at Emily? Let me.
We see you.
Oh, we do. Oh, very good. Oh, very good. Thank you. So in the process of looking through the archives, I get to see some of the wonderful photos, and I'm excited to share those with you today, or a few here. This one is from the Esherick family photo albums. This is a photo of the Estuary Farmhouse, and it becomes very clear that we're looking at a photo, and absolutely December is inspired by that farmhouse. For those of you who haven't been to the museum, the Eshericks lived in a house they called Sunnycrest that was just down at the bottom of the hill, just down the hill from the studio. And I think part of what's wonderful is that you get to see the translation that Esherick as an artist starts to make as he moves from what he's actually viewing to how he's going to depict it in the print. So in the photograph, for example, you can see where the roof above the door has this flat roof, and he decides to round that. And then you also notice there's this really dense kind of maze of vines on the front of the farmhouse. And rather than put that in the print, he kind of pares that down to just a few graceful vines. So he's making some really nice artistic choices in there. Maybe the best thing about this photograph, though, is that somebody has plopped a little baby down in the front of the house in the snow. So just like we do now, the Eshericks love to put put kids in front of things and take their pictures. This is likely his daughter, Ruth. She was born in 1922, so that would put her around the right age for the little baby in the photograph here. Speaking of Ruth, if we head to the next slide, I've got her here again, this time with her pup, and she's a little bit older, hopefully pretty close to the age she would have been when she was sledding down the hill that is depicted in this print called Winter Play. So Winter Play is 1928, so we've fast forwarded a few years. Certainly Esherick's style in printmaking is evolving. So you can see where he's sort of moving away from that more representational traditional style to this modernist look. He's kind of gathering shapes and forms. He's looking for this kind of bolder look. So the trees are all gathered into that one dark area. And certainly he's looking for some sort of patterns and rhythms. So you can see where the spaces in between the trees become this kind of repetitious form that leads you into the distance. I mentioned that this was Ruth sledding, and she would later recall the sort of wonderful story of heading down that hill. So at the time that the Eshericks lived there, Diamond Rock Hill, which is the road that the farmhouse is on, had these trenches for diverting rainwater when there was a heavy rain. And so as a sledding hill, she had these wonderful little like ski jumps as she's going down this hill. And then of course she would also recall this incredibly long trek back up the hill to take another ride. And I think that was certainly captured in Esherick's print as well, with those wonderful steps heading way, way off into the distance. And then if we go to the next slide, we see another tree-lined scene. In this case, it's the lane. So this is a print from 1931. I think it's a wonderful print. It's really very welcoming in this sort of symmetry, and it's sort of front-facing, so it welcomes you into the scene, and you have this wonderful one-point perspective. You're just going to walk right into that space. And in this case, it is the driveway of Helene Fisher. She was a wonderfully important friend and patron of Esherick's. So she and Esherick met at the Hedgerow Theater in the late 20s, early 30s. So not long after these pieces, or not long before these pieces were made. And she actually would become a very important patron for him, collecting his furniture. She did she commissioned him for a number of pieces that became very important. The Fisher corner desk and Fisher hall bench are a couple examples of those. And she also just really supported him when he was a young artist, kind of figuring out his adventures in expressionism particularly. And so the house is actually in Chestnut Hill. She also had a company, the Shute Curtain Company, if I'm saying that right, that she commissioned a lot of his work for. And it's likely that he spent a lot of time at this house. So he certainly spent a lot of time with this view. We have sketches as well as this print where he's sketching the driveway, sketching the trees. He would stay there sometimes in a guest bedroom, and he could see the trees again from that view. And he even called her Ma Fisher, so they were definitely very close. I should mention before we leave this slide, the Michener Museum of Art is doing a show in the fall of 2021 that is called Sculpture with a Purpose, Women, Patronage, and Wharton Esherick, 1930-1945. And there's 3 women featured in it. One of them is Helene Fisher. So definitely put that on your calendars, something to look out for. And then a couple of years back, we also added this print to our note card collection in our store. And when we did that, we did a blog post about their connection. So there's more than I could ever do in this talk. So I encourage you to check out that blog post as well. And I will put that in the chat, a little link to that. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Emily.
Great, thank you, Katie. So we sort of just wanted to end our little foray into some of Esherick's winter scenes with a few images that highlight sort of Esherick depicting scenes around Christmas, since we just had the holiday last week and we're still in the kind of holiday spirit and season. I think visitors to the site are probably familiar with Esherick's Santa decoration, which you can see in the lower left image, which of course a red leather piece that he would hang by the door during the Christmas season. What I love about it is it has this kind of abstract depiction of Santa and Christmas. And I think you see that in these two prints as well, Christmas Snows and Christmas Minstrels. Neither of them, even though they're sort of titled as Christmas scenes, depict Santa or a tree or presents or sort of any of the things that we think of when we think of sort of Christmas. Instead, they sort of depict these atmospheres that Christmas can take place in. And of course, you know, the image on the left, Christmas Snows, we can see by this kind of wild line work and this these sort of combination of these really intense, sharp, expressive lines and small sort of gouges that Esherick is depicting as wild a storm as, as one might possibly be able to imagine on Christmas. Again, he's using that whole bottom half of the page sort of left open to depict the sort of depth and weight of the snow. You know, we don't know the exact location of the house here. We suspect it would have been close to Esherick's own. So again, he's looking to his immediate surroundings for inspiration. And I love this depiction of Christmas minstrels on the right side of the page. It has this kind of timeless quality to it. You could be looking at these minstrels sort of clad in their winter garb. It's just as easy to imagine that this is medieval or yesterday, right? It has this sense of being out of time. And of course, the way he's handled the snow there is totally different. It's these orderly kind of almost pattern flakes. And but I love the way, especially that they interact with the lines that are depicting the bricks on the exterior of the houses. So we really hope that you've enjoyed this like very small snack-sized look at Esherick's winter scenes. We'd love to hear more from you about how the sort of spotlight talk to give you this little Esherick break in your day. We'd love to hear more of your feedback about that. And we have the links here to the blog post and the coloring pages. And of course, I think Katie is including that in the chat, and we'll include it in your the follow-up email. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and maybe we can take a look at some of the questions that are in the chat. So Katie, do you want to kick off and with a question or?
Sure. Well, you know, I noticed one of the questions, and I answered it in the chat briefly, but you know, somebody noticed that we were making the distinction between a wood engraving and a woodcut. And to the best of my knowledge, the difference refers to the side of the grain that you're carving into. So for a wood block or a woodcut, you are carving into sort of parallel with the way the grain runs, you know, the way you imagine the top of a table or something. You're carving along that surface. And with a wood engraving, you're carving on the end grain. And so often in wood engravings, you see a lot of finer lines and a lot of sharper lines. So it's interesting because in those early prints, like from Rhymes of Early Jungle Folk, not only are they definitely woodcuts, but you can actually see sometimes the grain in the print itself. So I think because Esherick was, you know, just starting out and maybe just using some pine or some, you know, of cheap or easily accessible woods, you can really tell the evolution there. So I thought that was a great question.
And I see too someone asking about the color for black and white. I mean, I think some of it, to my knowledge, is really compositional, especially in these winter prints, right? What happens? What can you do when you know, you are looking at that contrast of black and white to create drama, to create interest in a scene? And with snow, you know, it seems a natural fit. You know, I agree with Katie. I'm looking at the chat here. I think there were only a few where Esherick used color. I also don't know of a huge number, if any, of prints where he is using multiple blocks, which is something that if he was doing color block printing, he would probably be doing carving blocks that went in relationship with one another. I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and of course we have time for a couple more. If people just want to unmute themselves and ask, we're more than happy to have that. You can order note cards online now, absolutely, at the store. And keep watching the website for news about when the museum will open. That of course is changing in response to the situation with the virus, which is certainly we have no certainty about that. And I think we've gotten all of the questions here. I see. Oh, you can.
It's not a question. It's not a question, but I just want to tell you how much I enjoyed this, and I just stumbled on it. A friend on Facebook posted it, and she didn't show up, but my mother was raised there. My grandfather and grandmother were very, very active in the Hedgerow Theater, and both and Dorothy Cantrell is definitely a family friend. I recognize her name. It's fascinating. Yeah, my grandfather and his brothers were architects in the city, but they put together the homes that are in Rose Valley. I don't know if anyone knows what Rose Valley is, but it's a small planned community of artists and arts and crafts people. And they were building there in the late 20s and into the 30s. But yeah, they did Gilbert and Sullivan operas at the Hedgerow Theater. And we have photographs of the two of them, in the costumes and things. And so for me, this is just sort of a very unexpected walk down a familiar lane. My grandfather did prints. And using his press, when I was young, my mother, who was an artist, she would do in black and white, she would do block prints for all of our Christmas cards every year. And then there were 6 of us. We would be an assembly line with watercolor paints, and we would each have one color. There's one that I have a copy of that is the 6 of us trimming the tree. So somebody would do the red ball, someone would do the yellow star at the top and then pass it on. And then there's one of us, all 6 of us in one toboggan. But she was very much influenced by this type of this type of printing. And so it's just been very special for me, this 30 minutes that fell into my lap. So I appreciate it.
That's fantastic. And I also have to say, I'm looking at your note in the chat. I'm sure we can connect because the friend who showed it to you is my mother-in-law. So
she was my college roommate. Okay, where the heck is she? She was my roommate in college. So
we'll exchange information and we can chat after.
We will do that. Thank you. I'm glad I spoke up then, even though it feels sort of off track here. I'm going to mute myself, but I'll put my information in there and look for yours. Thank you. This was
great. Will new sets of note cards be available in the future? That's certainly something we're always thinking about. There's so many wonderful prints, and people really do love to share Esherick in that way. And I'm thinking maybe we have time for one more question. And if there's not, that's fine. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, share your feedback with us, and we really hope that we'll see you at the next Spotlight Talk or on January 7th for our event with Peter Park for Creatives on Esherick.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.